Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So I first connected with today's podcast guest, Whitney, through her heartfelt and courageous posts on Instagram. Her vulnerability in sharing her own journey through grief deeply resonated with me, because we both realized that through our own traumatic experiences that there isn't enough conversation around grief and trauma. Like her, many of my clients aren't prepared for the overwhelming emotion that they face, and that lack of preparation makes processing it even harder. And this shared understanding fuels my work as well as Whitney's work every day. So we show up to talk about grief because we don't want anyone else to feel the same sense of isolation or confusion that we know so many of you do. And both of us are passionate about creating more space for those conversations and ensuring others know that they aren't alone in their journey. So a little bit more about this week's guest. Whitney Lynn Allen is first and foremost mama to her sons Jackson and Leo, and she practiced law as a medical malpractice defense attorney for 10 years before her husband had a severe reaction to a bee sting and sustained a severe brain injury, subsequently resulting in his death. Whitney decided to turn her pain into purpose and followed her new calling to serve others who are also experiencing grief and trauma and share her vulnerable and personal grief journey with others. She is the author of the book about grief and life after loss titled Running in Trauma Stilettos, which is an Amazon bestseller. Whitney is also a certified grief educator and provides grief coaching to those who are ready for their own transformation and growth after loss. She shares the empowering message that there's so much beauty in life, even after losing a loved one. So welcome, Whitney.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
How are you today, given what we're going to speak about? How do you feel today?
I'm feeling, I think the word that comes to mind is at peace. I'm calm and ready to have this conversation today and hopefully help a lot of people with their own grief and trauma.
Well, so many people that might listen don't know you. So why don't we start with you sharing a little bit more than what I've already shared in the biography for people to get an understanding of what's been happening in your life. And that might be just the loss of your husband, or there might have been other things that you'd like to mention. It's up to you.
Sure. So it will be 3 years on Monday, October 14th. That was the day that my life changed forever. That's the day my husband, Ryan, got stung by a bee. He had never been allergic to bees before, and he had a very severe reaction, which caused a cascade of effects. So he went into cardiac arrest for about 20 minutes, which caused an anoxic brain injury, which happens when your brain is deprived of oxygen. And they were able to revive him. But that started basically like a 6-month time where we were trying to rehab him to see if he could return to a normal life, have a meaningful life in whatever way that looked like with a brain injury. But unfortunately, that was impossible for him and his situation, his injury. And he passed away on hospice on April 7th, 2022. And then kind of in the background of that, I'm a mom. So at that time I had a 3.5-year-old and I was pregnant with our second son. I was 26 weeks pregnant. So during that 6-month time period, not only was I dealing with, having a toddler and a husband that was in the hospital. So all of my time was really dedicated to trying to help him. I also gave birth during that time. So I was juggling a newborn and a toddler and a very sick husband and all the things. And after he died, I had this very immense feeling that I needed to share my story and our story, because I realized going through that as a society, we don't talk enough about grief and trauma and what it's like to walk through really dark times
Yeah,
and be able
absolutely.
to come out of that in a meaningful way, and not just go through life on autopilot, but really feel like you're living again. And what does that look like while you're carrying this pain that's a forever pain, but it can it be transformed into something that's manageable for you?
Mhm.
And I believe the answer is yes. So that's what I do now as a grief coach. That's what I teach in my books, and that's what I talk about online.
Mm. And so that's what spoke to me, because the way you just described it in the last paragraph of your story is exactly how I feel. I mean, my experience has also taught me that this is possible, and not just for the elusive few, but it's possible if we want it to be. But already just sharing your story for the last couple of minutes, there's been a lot going on even within those 6 short months.
Yeah.
So how did you, at the beginning, when you obviously didn't have experience in that, how did you deal with so many things on your plate? A toddler, being pregnant, then giving birth, and then dealing with your husband at the hospital. How did that work?
Yeah, I don't think when something like that happens, we deal with it at all. I think that's completely our bodies and minds protecting us and going to that fight or flight survival mode. I think that is how we survive through those really hard times. And I think, our bodies and minds are so protective of us. And it's the only way to survive. Like, half your brain is offline, the rational part is offline, the survival instinct kicks in, and you're just like, okay, this is what I need to do to get through the day. I need to hopefully eat. I need to take care of my babies. I need to take care of the people that I love that are sick. And I just have to get it done. And that's the mode I was in survival mode for a very long time.
Mm. So how did you manage with all the tasks that were basically in your hands? Now you were, from that point of view, even though your husband was alive, you were a single mom looking after the toddler and then being pregnant. But how much support did you have around you? What was there to guide you through that?
I did have support. My husband was a police officer. He was a very integral part of the community. So I had the support of the police community. They showed up in a really beautiful way with donations and gifts and food and all of these things. And then I had my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law that were there. But it was hard because although people are around you all the time, there was no one coming home with me at night, right? Like, it was just me picking up my son from daycare, feeding him, trying to take care of myself. And I was pregnant, so my other baby. So it was hard. There wasn't anyone, like, I was really alone. A lot of, the times that I was caring for my children. Um, there was a lot of time that I had to kind of figure out how to do life by myself.
Hmm. That that I'm sure many of the people listening here can relate to. And they feel like, what am I doing now? How do I survive this? And from the point of venture that you have now, and it's at the point of recording this, it's about 3 years after the loss of Ryan, or after the initial bee sting. What would you want those other people who are in the throes of it, which are in the first few months, what would you want them to hear from you, how you got through that? I mean, we often say like one breath at a time, but practically, how does that look like as a mother of a young child?
Yeah, I think just focus on, in the beginning and the acute stages of grief and loss and trauma, focusing on the basic things like getting enough to eat, make sure you're drinking enough water, make sure, you're sleeping, trying to get it's basic care, because nothing is going to really make you feel better but all of these little things, the baseline things that you need to do to take care of yourself are going to make the process just a little bit easier for you. It's not going to take away the pain. It's not going to make it all go away. But if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating, everything else is going to feel so much harder. So all you can do is lean into taking the best care of yourself that you can. And if that means getting therapy, getting coaching, going to your doctor and getting help with like, how can I sleep, right? Like get people on board with you so you can really lean into your basic care. And then after you're out of this like survival mode stage, then we can talk about, what does life look like for you now?
So what kind of support did you have at the beginning in terms of the survival state? Like what kind of support helped you at that time?
I started therapy right away. Right after his accident, I was doing sessions in the waiting room of the neuro ICU because I had no idea what the heck I was doing, what to expect. Like I was terrified of what I was feeling because the pain is so palpable. It feels like it's not just emotional pain, like the emotional pain physically affects you. You feel sick. You feel like you're wired but tired all the time. You're shaky, you're anxious. You just have this dread in your body, and it's something that it's hard to describe unless you've like lived through it. But I didn't know what to do with all of these really intense, uncomfortable emotions, and I knew that I needed someone to guide me through that process, and just someone to talk to, because there was so much going on. It was so fast moving that it just felt like I was unable to keep up with everything that life was throwing at me.
That is understandable, and I know from personal experience, but also from those that I'm working with, as well as you do. This is the really hard bit where we can't take away the pain, but we can walk alongside. If you're looking at the kind of work that you're doing, what would you say is most supportive to those that you care for, that you walk alongside of? Like specifically, also, you were sharing, about the care that you had, or the therapy that you had. If you look back and now also look at the clients that you have, what do you see has the most impact on them and had the most impact on you?
Yeah. I think number one, like I said, getting a good foundation of emotional, physical, and mental care. So just taking care of yourself, because without that, it's really hard to do anything else. I think getting somebody like a therapist or counselor or coach to talk to work through these really uncomfortable feelings, the validate your experience, and once you feel like you have a good groundwork, trying to get in some movement, because what these emotions really are is energy, and we have to get it out some way. And movement is such a beautiful way to do that. And if movement doesn't work for you or is inaccessible to you at the moment because you just feel so tired, which I understand, finding something that works for you to get out these emotions that you're feeling, whether that's journaling or dancing or listening to music or art, find what works for you to be able to express what you're feeling. Because what happens when you bottle all of these really uncomfortable emotions is that it stays with you, and it's going to come out one way or another. And it's going to come out at times that you don't want it to, and in ways that you don't want it to.
It sounds like you speak also from personal experience, and knowing from your channel of on Instagram, you also move a lot. I see you sometimes sharing of your walking or running, I suppose. And then, so of those things that you mentioned, for yourself, what was your go-to place to get movement? What was the thing that worked for you best?
Yeah, I love getting outside. I think getting out in the sun and nature, they've done studies on it scientifically. It's so healing. It helps regulate your nervous system in trauma, because it makes you feel more grounded when you're outside and you feel like connected to all of these things that are bigger than yourself, right? And it's a spiritual thing too. And I think spirituality helped me through some of my really hard moments is just feeling connected versus disconnected, which we tend to feel very disconnected from ourselves and also the world when our nervous systems are dysregulated from trauma. So just connecting again to ourselves, our body. How do we feel when the wind hits us, like the sun hits our face, like identifying what these really beautiful experiences feel like versus these traumatic moments that we're trying not to live and ruminate over and live in all the time.
And just watching you speak about those experiences, I can see that certain aspects of nature really must mean a lot to you, like when you were talking about the wind or the experiences you have in nature. So that really seems to fuel your being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I still like I just got back from a run a little while ago. And I love when the cooler weather comes in. I live in Pennsylvania, so in the fall is just a really beautiful time to get grounded and feel connected to yourself. And I mean, movement, exercise, it was the thing that helped me regulate my nervous system.
Mm. And as we both talk about nervous system regulation, so like for me, this is at the base of how we deal with trauma in our body, is to understand how the nervous system reacts to it, and it does the best it can at the point of trauma hitting us. So one of the things that you share in your Instagram post, or one of the posts that touched me, were the 6 things that you wished you had asked before your husband died. And one of them I wanted to ask back to you, which was, what do you want me to remember to tell myself in the hard days? So if I were to ask you now, with a bit of time distance from the hard times or the really hard times, what would you want to remember yourself? What would you want to remind yourself of looking back?
Yeah, I think it would be, it's going to be really hard, but you're braver than you feel right now. And to just take it one moment at a time. And even when you feel the most broken, you're going to rise. Like you're going to take that step forward. You're going to continue on. It is going to get better. Just never, don't give up, even though it's in the moment, just surrendering to like all of the messiness, all of the pain is the easy way, right? But I also didn't really have that option with 2 little kids. So I think that really helped as well.
Yeah. In my case, as I don't know how much you know about my story, but I had twins and the younger one died on day 3. So in a way, I had a toddler, so I wanted to be a mother to her, but I also grieved her sister. And so similar to what you're saying, I didn't have a choice. It was like, what am I doing? I'm grieving, but I'm also joyous or want to be there as a mother. And it's like this duality of those 2 things that go side by side, but we can't deny one for the other. And I mean, imagine in your situation, you were pregnant and your husband was from one day to the other no more available. That is really intense. Another question that you would have wanted to ask him was, what stories are the most important to tell our boys? And if we're extrapolating that now from the time of understanding loss and trauma, what would you want your boys to remember about their mother following the death of their father? What would you want them to remember as how you got through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, the most important thing was that I made their life as happy and normalized as possible during a really chaotic time. And that, they know that mom like still did the birthday parties and we still played and we still did really fun activities and we smiled, and I didn't let this really terrible thing just completely cascade over us to the point where there would be no joy, right? I allowed myself to have joy, and I tried to experience joy with them. And for them, although, I'm sure my oldest saw me crying, that's totally normal. and perfectly healthy and fine. But he also saw me, working and working out and going to therapy and like doing all these things for myself so I could show up as the best mom I could for them so they could still have a childhood that, although I can't take away all the trauma from both of them, I try to minimize the effects of it for them.
Yeah. It's like a balancing act, isn't it? Because you're there in the throes of it as well. And then you're also a mother. It's like you're having to attend to both of those sides.
Yeah. 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 And it's, the thing when I work with clients that are parents, I say it's almost impossible to be completely, leaned into taking care of your children and then being there for your own grief and trauma. You kind of have to oscillate between the two. And you're going, like, one is going to suffer, like you're not going to be able to tend to your grief while you're tending to your children. And you have to find pockets of the day, like when your kids are home at night and they're home from school, like your mom or dad, and you have to kind of like, you have to put your grief on a shelf and like, that's okay, because that's how we survive. And we don't have the luxury of not having children, right? And we have to care for them and they have to feel loved. And, you have to find time for your grief, but it has to be when you're not being a parent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. It has to be shelved or parked somewhere, if possible. I mean, given the nervous system and giving space for both of them.
Yeah.
How did your surroundings change after the loss of your husband? How did your circle of friends and family, how did they manage with that? And how did they change or develop? What did you notice in your surroundings?
I think when a horrible event happens, everyone comes together, right? I had such a sense of like everyone was united, especially when Ryan was in the hospital. Like there was so much camaraderie and support. And after his celebration of life, everybody goes back to their lives, which, you can't be mad about that. Life goes on. Life is for the living. And although I knew all these things, practically speaking, it was hard because you're just starting to figure out what life looks like without your person. And also like your purpose or my purpose for 6 months was taking care of him and going to the hospital and like making sure his care was good and all of these things. And then I am just now a widow with 2 little kids. And now what do I do? Like, what does my life look like now when everyone else is able to go back to their lives? Like they're grieving, but their lives, practically speaking, logistically speaking, are untouched.
Yeah.
So I think that to me was very frustrating and painful. And, I think therapy helped kind of guide me through that process of feeling that unfairness that like everyone else is allowed to go back to their lives and I have to start over. And this wasn't supposed to be my story. So it's hard and relationships do get affected because everyone is grieving the same person, but their grief is very different. And what everyone has to do to tend to their grief is different. And as a widow or widower, and I always tell my clients this, we have to completely transform because losing a spouse requires that transformation because everything in our lives are touched by this loss, this particular loss, whereas no one else has to go through that radical transformation because their lives aren't as affected, and their identities aren't as affected by like another loss. The loss of a spouse is very identity focused. It's very logistically like routines and ritual focused. Everything about like your spouse being in your world when they die, there's nothing untouched. And because we have to go through this very radical transformation in order to not only survive, but thrive after a loss, that can be the cause of a lot of conflict and misunderstanding.
So tell me a little bit more about that transformation, because I think that's really interesting and contains a lot. You mentioned a couple of keywords like everything is touched, your identity and all your logistics. But go a little bit deeper. Tell us what that meant for you in terms of transforming yourself.
I mean, the biggest one that comes to mind is before Ryan's accident, I was a lawyer. So after losing him, I realized, I it doesn't feel authentic to me to be a lawyer anymore. Like, I don't think I can do this, knowing that it didn't feel like a purpose for me, like purposeful for me. It didn't feel like life fulfilling, and knowing that life is so short now, and not just knowing that, but like truly
Experiencing, yeah.
embodying that experience. I didn't want to spend my life working in something that I didn't feel had a lot of purpose for me. So what that meant is like, I have to start over, like in my job but I have to find a way to make money and support my family. But also, try to give back to the world in a way that feels like it's creating meaning and purpose for me, and taking my loss and making something of it. I think your values and moral, like what you really find important, changes too.
Absolutely.
You're like a lot less patient with people that just don't serve you. So your circle gets smaller because you're not going to put up with people being toxic in your life. So there's so many aspects of my life that have changed. Those are probably the biggest ones. But yeah, your priorities shift. I'm a completely different person than I was before. And that's okay. I mean, I like parts of myself, like a lot of the parts of myself now that are new, that I've discovered after loss. And then there are some that, I'm trying to like, and I've had to let go of a lot of parts of myself that no longer serve me.
So this is what propelled you also to become a grief educator, I suppose.
Yeah.
In terms of the meaning and the purpose.
Yes, I think that's part of it. And also knowing that there's not a lot of people that do this work, and it's so needed.
One of the things that I also wanted to talk to you about, and it's probably on a lot of people's mind, as to when or how do I know that I'm ready to find another person, to be dating after loss, to put my heart out again after it has been broken by what I thought was life with that person. Are you okay to talk about this a little bit in this context? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because I'm thinking also it's a topic where, I mean, we're talking about the loss and the trauma, but that is also a step forward back into life. And so I've known it from clients, but also from guests that I had on the podcast, where they wondering, so how do I go back, and when, and what if? Would you like to share a little bit about your story, how that happened in your life?
I think for me, because I had such a beautiful marriage with my husband, Ryan, and we had such a beautiful relationship, it was, it had such a positive impact on my life that I think it's the most natural thing in the world when you lose that, to want that again for yourself. Society is going to make you feel like honor and loyalty comes from not getting into another relationship. And I actually think the opposite is that, what a testament of your relationship with somebody to be brave enough to step into that space again, because they made you feel safe and loved. And you feel like you can have that for yourself again. I think it's scarier for people that maybe come out of a not so healthy relationship to find love again, because they don't know what they want or need, because they never got that in their previous relationship. And I think there's a lot of fear involved, because maybe their relationship wasn't very healthy. For me, I didn't feel any fear in that way. I felt like, I don't know what that looks like for me. I don't know when I'm going to find that person. But am I willing to try? Am I willing to take steps forward and date? Like a date's so casual. There's nothing like, you don't go on a date and then you get married the next day, right? It's, you just want to feel something else besides grief. And I think that's totally okay. So for me, I mean, it's like was fate. I met my fiance now, um, pretty quickly after Ryan passed, and I wasn't looking for like my next husband. I just wanted to go out on a date, and we kept going out on dates together, and it worked out. And that's how life is, right? We don't predict these things.
Mm. And as you
Um,
say, some of the people might have judgments around how soon or how quick or what that means, but in the end, it's your decision.
yeah. And if it took 3 years to find somebody that made sense to me and my children and that I really loved and cared for, then it took 3 years. But I think that if you're in a place where you're willing to work on yourself and your grief, as well as work on yourself within a relationship, and the person you're with is willing to be very understanding and patient with your grief, and also try to understand, that the complexity of that situation, and it feels like the right thing, why suspend what you want in your life? Life is short. I think go for it. Like don't not do something that you want to do because other people are saying that it's wrong for whatever reason.
Mm. You mentioned the delicacy of how can you be with your grief at the same time as dating, and in your post you mentioned about your now fiance, of how he dealt with that. And I guess from the people that I know, one of them being my father, who got married again after my mother died. The question is, or his question is often, I can't speak too much about your mother because I don't want to upset her. But I mean, I don't have that understanding that we shouldn't. How is that in your life and with your now fiance?
Yeah, I don't feel that way. I talk about Ryan when it feels like I should bring him up, right? I'm I don't live in a space where I'm curating um my emotions or my experiences. But a lot of my grief now, which I think is really normal, especially in like mature grief, is that a lot of the experience is internal and it's a very private thing and it's not like for show. So a lot of my grief is I don't need to share with everyone unless it's really necessary or if it's affecting my how I am, you know, how I'm acting to other people, right? Like if I'm having a really griefy day and I'm angry and getting short tempered, I mean, that's something to communicate because, they're not going to know why you're acting a certain way. Like there has to be communication. But like if I'm okay and I don't feel like I'm like having a moment, but I can move through it by myself, like that's usually how the experience is for me now. But I don't curate. If I want to say something, I say it.
Mm. So tell me, your book, the first book is called Running in Trauma Stilettos. How did you come up with that title? Because I was taken by the title with the stilettos. Tell us a little bit more. Is that your usual shoe or is that your unusual shoe?
No, I really love the imagery of it because, walking stilettos is a very uncomfortable experience for most of us. So I was kind of taking that uncomfortability, that really hard experience, and kind of trying to equate that to an imagery of like running down a hallway in stilettos and equating that with the trauma and the grief that I went through. Because that's kind of what it felt like for me. It's like doing this really impossible thing, this very uncomfortable thing. So that's how I came up with it.
Mm. And you've got a new book coming up. When is
Mhm.
that coming out and what is it about? Do you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, so my new book, What Must Be Carried, it comes out March 5th, 2025. So have a few months. And my first book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, that was purely memoir. That's what happened. That was like my relationship with my husband, what happened with his medical event and like the events leading up to his death and a little bit after. My second book is it's a cross between memoir and self-help. So if someone picks it up that's going through grief, they're going to be able to get tools and strategies and mindset shifts, like really practical advice on how to help themselves move through the experience of grief and create a beautiful life after loss. So that's really the premise of the book.
And is it mostly for widows, or for what audience would you recommend this book, both of their books, to be read by?
Yeah, honestly, it's for any person that is going through an adversity, like whether that's a death or not, because grief and trauma, like that can be a lot of different situations, right? So it's not just for widows, it's for any griever, it's for any person that wants to help a griever, and it's for anyone going through a rough time that needs really practical tools to be able to help themselves through adversity.
So, for full openness, I haven't read your Stilettos book, but I'm looking forward to have a look at your new book as well. So let me know when it comes closer to date. I'll let the audience know about your book. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing the way you dealt with this death of your husband, Ryan. And how I always end with my guests is by just asking some rapid fire question. Would that be okay now?
Okay. Yeah, that would be fine.
So grieving and trauma means?
Feeling really uncomfortable emotions and trying to move through them as best you can.
Like running in trauma stilettos?
Yes.
And healing means?
Finding an inner peace and contentment.
And what would you say you have learned about yourself in the light of your loss and trauma?
That's really a hard question. That I'm really brave and that I'm very resourceful, especially when I need to be, and I'm up against, like it seems like fires at my feet. And that whatever life throws at me, I can move through it.
You put that in such a nice sentence, that exactly the reason why I wanted you to be a guest on the podcast, because that really exemplifies through the way you share that resilience that I hope that people who are in a similar space will look forward to. So would it be one thing that you wish people would know about loss or trauma?
That it's going to feel really bad, especially at first, but it's not going to last forever. But you also have to want to heal, and you have to want that for yourself, because if you remain in a state and a place where life just sucks and you're a victim, like you will stay in that space. So if you need help, reach out to somebody, learn the tools and the strategies you need to get out of that headspace. But you're very brave, even though you probably don't feel like it. And these feelings won't last forever.
We speak the same language. It's lovely to listen to you. What would be one thing that you would say has changed since your loss and your trauma that you wouldn't want to miss?
I would say just how my boys have grown. When everything happened, like I hadn't even given birth yet. My son was 3.5. Now they're almost 3 and almost 7. And they really keep me grounded to what matters in life and to reach for the joy, and it pushes me to be present and patient and give so much grace to myself and also them. And I don't want to miss a moment with them.
I would probably add, or one of the things that I heard you say was you notice a lot of change within yourself. Like you said, you're no longer the person that you were before. And actually, some of the parts you are more, or maybe that's my word, you're more who you actually are now than you were before. Would you say that is right, the way I phrased it?
I think that I'm exactly who I should be now, and I was exactly who I should have been before my world fell apart. And those are two very different people, but like I was the best version of myself in both realities.
Final words. Thank you so much for sharing yourself and for your time. And as always, all the details that you can find Whitney by are in the show notes. So go and check out, especially Whitney's sharing on Instagram, which have inspired me for today. Thank you so much, Whitney.
Yeah, thank you. Take good care.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.